In this video, we're going to apply a fabric material to our speaker cover and use some of our mapping options. So to get started, we're going to apply a material to our speaker cover. We're going to select fabric, cloth, and we want to select a cloth that most closely represents a speaker cover. In this case, I'm going to use gray cotton. Now you'll notice as we see gray cotton selected, we have these blue and pink lines. Now these blue and pink lines are basically our mapping. If we go to our mapping tab, we can look that our mapping is currently set to automatic. Now what this is doing is it's automatically mapping based on how it thinks we should map the part. We have several options though. We have a surface option, and you can see a preview of how that changes the mapping on the screen. We have projection option, which is essentially taking it from a plane and projecting it out. One thing you'll notice is that on the edges that are close to being perpendicular to our mapping plane, it's actually smearing the image. So this is not a good option for what we need to do here. We have spherical, which is more of a rotational type mapping. We have cylindrical, which is a very similar option and something that works well on revolved parts. And then we have our automatic option. In a case like this, I'm going to use our surface mapping because it'll give us the best representation of actually wrapping this fabric around our part. With that surface option, we still have some other things that we can do. We have some size orientation options. We can keep a fixed aspect ratio, and that's very important. That's something I would highly recommend unless you're very familiar with the material that you're modifying. If you use fit width to selection or fit height to selection, it's important to understand the size of the material image file that you're using. Most of these material images, especially ones like these fabrics, will have a certain edge interface where they seamlessly transition into a second patch of this material. If you fit width to selection, fit height to selection, it's going to auto scale it up to be a single patch over the whole part. Now, obviously, the patch isn't going to be the appropriate size for the part that we're using. So it's nice to keep the same scale that it comes in, or at least a scale that's close to what you want. We can manually manipulate these as needed. We also have some options to rotate this if we want to rotate the way the grain is laying. In something like this, like a cotton fabric, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but if you're dealing with a perforated material, or maybe something like a carbon fiber or other composite material, it's very important to get that weave direction right. So having the ability to rotate it comes in very handy. We can also mirror horizontally and vertically, and we also have a reset button to go back to the default scale. So that means that if we decide to change the scale, for instance, make each cell 100, we can see that the change makes this quite a bit smaller. If instead we make it larger, say 250 by 250, you can see that it makes that grain larger. We have a lot of control over how this image is going to look directly from our mapping option. Let's go ahead and hit OK, and let's do a preview window of this. So this will give us a good idea of what the final cloth is going to look like. Now, as we can see on the screen, that doesn't look very realistic. So what we want to do is go back and edit that appearance, back to our mapping section, and we want to change the scale. I'm going to change that back to 150. Say OK, zoom in, and I'm actually going to use my render region option and do a preview window of just the grain. So that looks a little bit better. Let's go ahead and do a preview of the entire thing now. The new grain looks a little bit better. We might want to make it just a hair smaller. Back into edit our appearance. Let's adjust the scale one more time. I'll go ahead and make both 100 millimeters and do one last preview window. Now, it's important when you're doing this that you take a look at a preview window and you don't try to do a full render every time. From this angle, that looks like a pretty good representation of speaker cloth. So notice how we used a material that wasn't necessarily the exact material we needed in reality, but it's pretty close to being the right appearance for what we need on our final part.